wet locations, the use of specific threadless couplings and connectors is mandatory when working with rigid conduit, as detailed in section 250.83. This requirement ensures the integrity and safety of electrical systems in environments where moisture is prevalent. There are two primary types of threadless couplings and connectors approved for use with rigid conduit in wet locations. Firstly, raintight couplings, and secondly, watertight couplings. Raintight couplings and connectors are designed to prevent the ingress of rainwater into the conduit system. These fittings typically incorporate features such as sealing rings or gaskets that create a barrier against moisture penetration. While raintight fittings offer a significant level of protection, they may not be suitable for applications where the conduit system is subjected to submersion or continuous exposure to water. Watertight couplings and connectors, on the other hand, provide a more robust level of protection against water ingress. These fittings are designed to prevent water from entering the conduit system, even when submerged or exposed to continuous water spray. Watertight fittings often incorporate multiple sealing features and are constructed from materials that are resistant to water damage. The choice between raintight and watertight fittings depends on the specific environmental conditions and the criticality of maintaining a dry conduit system. In areas where heavy rainfall or occasional splashing is expected, raintight fittings may be sufficient. However, in areas where submersion or continuous water exposure is likely, watertight fittings are essential to ensure the long-term reliability of the electrical system. When selecting threadless couplings and connectors for rigid conduit in wet locations, it is crucial to verify that the fittings are listed and labeled for the intended use. Listed fittings have been tested and certified by a recognized testing laboratory to meet specific performance standards, ensuring their suitability for wet environments. The listing mark on the fitting indicates that it has been evaluated for raintight or watertight performance, as applicable. In addition to selecting the appropriate type of fitting, proper installation is essential to ensure a reliable and watertight connection. The conduit end should be properly reamed to remove any sharp edges or burrs that could damage the sealing surfaces. The fittings should be tightened to the manufacturer's specified torque to ensure a proper seal. When installing threadless couplings and connectors in wet locations, it is also important to consider the compatibility of the fitting materials with the conduit material. Using dissimilar metals can lead to galvanic corrosion, which can compromise the integrity of the connection. For example, when using aluminum conduit, it is recommended to use aluminum fittings to avoid galvanic corrosion. Similarly, when using steel conduit, it is recommended to use steel fittings. The National Electrical Code, or NEC, provides detailed requirements for the installation of electrical systems in wet locations. Section 300.6 of the NEC addresses protection against corrosion and deterioration, and it specifies that raceways, including rigid conduit, and fittings installed in wet locations must be made of materials suitable for the environment. The NEC also requires that all unused openings in boxes, conduit bodies, and fittings be closed to provide protection against moisture and corrosion. In addition to the NEC requirements, local building codes may also have specific requirements for electrical installations in wet locations. It is important to consult with local authorities to ensure compliance with all applicable codes and regulations. When working with rigid conduit in wet locations, it is important to use appropriate tools and techniques to ensure a safe and reliable installation. Conduit benders should be used to create smooth, uniform bends that do not damage the conduit or compromise its structural integrity. Conduit threaders should be used to create clean, accurate threads that provide a tight, watertight connection. When cutting rigid conduit, it is important to use a sharp saw or cutting tool to avoid creating burrs or sharp edges. The cut end should be reamed to remove any burrs and ensure a smooth, clean surface for connecting to fittings. Proper grounding is essential for all electrical systems, but it is especially important in wet locations where the risk of electrical shock is increased. The NEC requires that all metal conduit systems be properly grounded to provide a path for fault current to return to the source. Grounding can be achieved by connecting the conduit system to a grounding electrode system, such as a ground rod or a metal water pipe. In addition to grounding the conduit system, It is also important to ground all metal enclosures and equipment that are connected to the conduit system. This can be achieved by using grounding bushings or bonding jumpers to connect the enclosures and equipment to the grounding system. Regular inspection and maintenance are essential to ensure the long-term reliability of electrical systems in wet locations. Conduit systems should be inspected periodically for signs of corrosion, damage, or loose fittings. Any damaged or corroded component should be replaced promptly to prevent water ingress and maintain the integrity of the system. Fittings should be checked to ensure that they are properly tightened and that the sealing surfaces are clean and free from debris. Any loose fittings should be tightened to the manufacturer's specified torque. In addition to inspecting the conduit system, it is also important to inspect the grounding system to ensure that it is properly maintained. Grounding connections should be checked for corrosion or looseness, and any damaged or corroded components should be replaced. The grounding electrode system should be tested periodically to ensure that it is providing an effective ground path. When working with electrical systems in wet locations, it is important to take precautions to protect yourself from electrical shock. Always energize the circuit before working on any electrical components. Use insulated tools and wear appropriate personal protective equipment, such as rubber gloves and safety glasses. Avoid working in wet conditions whenever possible. If you must work in wet conditions, use a ground fault circuit interrupter, or GFCI, to protect yourself from electrical shock. A GFCI is a device that detects ground faults and quickly interrupts the flow of electricity, preventing serious injury or death. In summary, the selection and installation of threadless couplings and connectors for rigid conduit in wet locations require careful consideration of several factors, including the environmental conditions, the type of fitting, the installation techniques, and the applicable codes and regulations. By following these guidelines, it is possible to ensure a safe and reliable electrical system that will provide years of trouble-free service. Understanding the specific requirements for wet locations, such as the need for raintight or watertight fittings as stipulated in Section 250.83, is crucial for compliance and safety. Always refer to the NEC and local codes for detailed requirements and best practices. Remember that listed fittings have undergone rigorous testing to ensure their performance in wet environments. Proper installation, including reaming conduit ends and tightening fittings to the specified torque, is essential for creating a watertight seal. Considering material compatibility is also crucial to prevent galvanic corrosion. Regular inspection and maintenance are vital for identifying and addressing any issues that may compromise the integrity of the system. Finally, always prioritize safety by de-energizing circuits, using insulated tools, and wearing appropriate personal protective equipment. By adhering to these guidelines, you can ensure a safe and reliable electrical installation that meets the demands of wet environments. Furthermore, it is important to know that the definition of a wet location can vary depending on the specific application and the applicable codes and standards. In general, a wet location is defined as an area where water or other liquids are frequently present or where condensation or moisture is likely to accumulate. Examples of wet locations include car washes, agricultural buildings, and outdoor installations. In some cases, an area may be considered a wet location even if it is not directly exposed to water. For example, an enclosed room that is subject to high humidity levels may be classified as a wet location. It is important to carefully evaluate the environmental conditions to determine whether an area should be classified as a wet location. Once an area has been classified as a wet location, it is important to select electrical equipment and wiring methods that are suitable for the environment. In addition to using raintight or watertight fittings, it may also be necessary to use corrosion-resistant conduit and enclosures. The NEC provides detailed requirements for the selection and installation of electrical equipment in wet locations. Section 410.4 of the NEC addresses luminaires in damp or wet locations, and it specifies that luminaires installed in wet locations must be marked as suitable for wet locations. The NEC also requires that all wiring in wet locations be installed in a manner that protects it from moisture and corrosion. This may involve using waterproof connectors, sealing conduit entrances, and providing adequate drainage. In addition to the NEC requirements, local building codes may also have specific requirements for electrical installations in wet locations. It is important to consult with local authorities to ensure compliance with all applicable codes and regulations. When working with electrical systems in wet locations, it is important to be aware of the potential hazards and to take precautions to protect yourself from electrical shock. Always to energize the circuit before working on any electrical components. Use insulated tools and wear appropriate personal protective equipment. Avoid working in wet conditions whenever possible. If you must work in wet conditions, use a GFCI to protect yourself from electrical shock. Also, remember the importance of properly sealing any unused openings in electrical boxes or enclosures located in wet areas. These openings can provide a pathway for moisture to enter, leading to corrosion and potential electrical hazards. Use appropriate sealing compound or plugs to ensure that all openings are tightly sealed. Another critical aspect of electrical installations in wet locations is the proper support and mounting of conduit and equipment. Ensure that conduit is securely supported to prevent sagging or movement, which can stress connections and compromise their watertightness. Use appropriate mounting hardware that is resistant to corrosion and suitable for the environment. When installing equipment such as lighting fixtures or receptacles, follow the manufacturer's instructions carefully and ensure that all connections are properly sealed and protected from moisture. Furthermore, consider the use of condensation drains in conduit systems that are subject to condensation buildup. These drains allow moisture to escape, preventing it from accumulating and potentially damaging electrical components. Regular inspection and maintenance of electrical systems in wet locations are crucial for identifying and addressing any potential problems before they become serious hazards. Look for signs of corrosion, water damage, or loose connections. Test GFCI devices regularly to ensure that they are functioning properly. Promptly repair or replace any damaged or corroded components. By taking these precautions and following the guidelines outlined in the NEC and local codes, you can ensure a safe and reliable electrical installation in wet locations. Remember that electrical safety is paramount, and it is always best to err on the side of caution when working with electricity in potentially hazardous environments. Understanding these specific requirements related to wet locations will help ensure compliance with electrical codes and contribute to the safety and longevity of electrical systems in such environments.